Alright, today our area of study will be on Acts chapter 7, 30 to 35, and we'll also be looking at Exodus 2, 15 to 25, and then Exodus 3 and 4. So, as we open, I'll read these first verses in Acts. Now, when 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in a flame of fire in a bush. When Moses saw it, he was amazed at the sight. And as he drew near to look, there came the voice of the Lord. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. And Moses trembled and did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, Take off the sandals from your feet, for the place you are standing is holy ground. Verse 34, I have surely seen the afflictions of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their groaning, and I have come down to deliver them. And now, come, I will send you to Egypt. This Moses whom they rejected, saying, Who made you a ruler and a judge? This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. Alright. So we see this man Moses. Last week we saw this exact guy. He was born, and to save his life, his mom put him in a basket and put him in the Nile River, where the Pharaoh's daughter, the princess of Egypt, got him out and saved him, and then raised him as her own daughter. Oh, sorry, and she raised him as her own son. So we saw that, and then we saw him being raised in the palace in Egypt, and he saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite, and he killed the Egyptian. It's verse 14 that says, Who made you a ruler and a judge over us, the Israelite? So they did not agree that Moses was who he says he was. They didn't believe that he was there to save them and help them. They think he's going to kill them all. So what's very interesting is now as we pick up, we see a man, Moses, and as we'll read in Exodus, who is a humbled man. He flees to Midian. So we're going to go over that real quick. I'll start in verse 15 of Exodus chapter 3. Or Exodus chapter 2 it is. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood and saved them, and watered their flock. When they had come home to their father Reuel, he said, How is it that you have come home so soon today? Verse 19, they said, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock. And he said to his daughters, Then where is this man? Why have you left him? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. Verse 23, During those many days the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So we see this man, Moses, has now fled for his life from Pharaoh, and he found himself in Midian. And he finds himself with a Midian priest. His name is Reuel. We'll also see it as Jethro. And this man had 7 daughters. And his daughters went to draw water from the well to water the flock, and shepherds came and drove them away. So Moses sees this, he saved them and waters their flock. So God just so happened to have Moses at the well at the same time as this happens. And Moses steps up, saves the day, saves all the 7 daughters, and the girls go home early to Jethro and explain what happens, and Jethro's like, well, why isn't he here? Come on, go bring him so he can have dinner with us. And Moses it says, was content to dwell with this man. And the man gave, so Jethro gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. So now we see Moses goes from fleeing for his life to now having a wife, and then, as we'll see, a son, Gershom. And it's just another amazing picture. So the first 40 years, Moses was fleeing for his life, and now, these 40 years, we see him start a family. God starts working on his heart and starts humbling this man. It's, of course, places like these where we can grow the most spiritually. When we're content with who God is and we're content with where God has us, that we will grow. Sometimes it's harder to grow in those harder times. We'll grow in different ways. God will show up more. But when we're happy, content, and God's growing in us and working through us, that's when, of course, we can truly grow our faith in God and just strengthen our walk. And that's kind of what he does with Moses for these next 40 years. He has a family. He has people that, like a true family. These are his blood relatives. He's never really been with his blood relatives because of being in Egypt, and he was adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter. So he's not really had this, and he now gets to have a family of his own, a wife, two kids, and a father-in-law and all the flock, and he has a job, and he's feeding and watering the flock. So then chapter 3, verse 1, we jump in there. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, there's the other name, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. That is a really cool portion of scripture. There's a bush, and it is not burning. What we see is a Christophany. This is Jesus, or what we think is Jesus appearing before the New Testament, and this reminds me of a portion of scripture. It's in Daniel. This will be Daniel chapter 3, verses 19 through 30. And it says it this way. Therefore, we'll start at verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of a horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And so we see that happens. And then we see in verse 12, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Verse 15, Now if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace, and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hands, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than its usual heat, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up, and in haste he declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said, "True, O king." He answered, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, but the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the fiery furnace, and he declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of these men. The hair on their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. So here, I think, is one of those amazing pictures of kind of this Exodus story. We see that this man Moses comes up to a fire, which was a Christophany. And then we see in Exodus there's a Christophany. So a 4th man appears in the furnace with the image of Son of God, is what he says, the sons of the gods. So this is a very similar circumstance. We see that God shows up and in that circumstance, and here he's speaking to Moses through a burning fiery furnace that was not being consumed. And that word "not being consumed" is basically the same thing that we see with this Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego story, where these men are not consumed by the fire. They are actually not even touched by the fire. They don't smell like fire. Their hair is not even singed. Anyone who's been around fire knows, even if you're just at a campfire and you get anywhere near that fire, the hair on your knuckles burns off, or stuff like that. Not even the hair on their heads was singed. Nothing. It was not consumed. Not even the smell of smoke. So I think it's very interesting that we see another Christophany, and this is the best way I can describe what happened with Moses. What he's seeing is this bush is there, but it's not being consumed. So we see that Moses' curiosity is definitely piqued. He draws near. We'll see that. And when the Lord saw, this is verse 4, saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses," and he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So we see that Moses is on holy ground. And what does God tell him? Remove your sandals off your feet, because this is holy ground. God has shown up on this mountain. This mountain. This would be Mount Sinai. This would be the same mountain where God will, again, give Moses the 10 Commandments, where Moses will break all 10 Commandments at one time by shattering on the ground when he sees what Aaron has done, and they're making a golden calf out of the jewelry and gold God gave them from Egypt, and they're worshipping the calf. This would be that same very mountain where God would have Moses coming down with his face glowing, so that he had to cover his face so that everyone else could look at him, because he was glowing and people were afraid of him. And we kind of see Moses do a very similar thing here. He says, "And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God." And there's a little bit of a contrast there. Next time we see this thing said about Moses, he'll be hiding his face because he was in the glory of God and was shining like the glory of God. And he hid his face for others. But this time he's afraid, and like the other people are, so he hides his face. He doesn't want anything to do. He's terrified, as I would be. And we see that God introduces himself as the God of your father, the God of Abraham, and he goes down the line. So this is this very God who's there in this bush. It says in verse 7, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? That's verse 11 of Exodus chapter 3. And that, to me, this verse right here describes the change that we've seen in Moses. We see him going to be the guy to take things into his own hands by killing an Egyptian, to saying this, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He says, Who am I that I could do that? We saw Moses in his taking things into his own hand and doing things by his own power, do the complete wrong thing by killing a man. And now he has had 40 years to reflect on this. And what those 40 years do is God's humbling this man. He's turning Moses into a man that he can use. It's a lot harder to teach an arrogant man who thinks he knows it all than a man who is humbled and realizes he has so much to learn. And this is kind of what we're seeing here. God is ready to use this man Moses now that he's been humbled. And Moses realizes that I'm nobody, God. I'm not worthy of this. Who am I that I could do this? And that's really amazing pictures. When we realize how broken we are, like, who am I to lead your people, God? Who am I to teach your people? Who am I to lead this certain area? Who am I to serve in this area at my church? Who am I to actually live for you? Who am I? Like, once we are at the point where, God, I can't do it. God, I don't have it in me to do this, God. I need you. And once we do it on God's strength and not our own, that's when God truly, truly can use us and transforms our lives. And that's kind of what we're seeing here with Moses. And again, it's really important to mention that God doesn't call the equip, he equips the called. And that's kind of what we're seeing with Moses, right? Moses is probably not the most equipped guy for this. I mean, it's perfect. God chose the perfect guy. He's just going to choose the guy who was raised by Pharaoh in the palace to save the people of Egypt out of the hand of Pharaoh. The very guy that Pharaoh paid for his education, paid for his living, paid for everything. This very guy will be the one who God uses to deliver the Israelites out of the Egyptians' hand. Truly remarkable. This man, he is, because God called him, he uses those talents and the things that Moses has, and he equips him back then, and now God is using those very same things. But the difference is Moses isn't doing it on his own strength, he's doing it through God's strength, in God's calling, and in God's will. So that's kind of what we have here. It's just a truly amazing picture, right? We can use our work. We can use, if you're worried about serving in a certain area at church because you don't feel called to it, or maybe not called, maybe you don't feel like you're the best person for the job. Sometimes if you step up, and God will equip you. He'll equip the called, and it's just truly remarkable. And we see that. We see him do that here. So it says, and then God's answer here, and this is so comforting to all of us even today. He says in verse 12, this is God speaking, but I will be with you, and this shall be a sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. But we'll look at the beginning. He says, but I will be with you. That is what God answers. He could have gone so many ways, like, Moses, you've got this. Whatever. He could have gone about it so many different ways, but he says, Moses, what does he say, verse 12? I will be with you. Truly remarkable, right? God says, I will be with you. God is going to, he doesn't say, don't worry, everything's going to be great, everything's going to go perfectly. He just says, I will be with you. And sometimes that's all the peace and all that we need, is we just need to know that God will be with us. And that's truly a remarkable picture of who God is, that he'll be with us. And we can know that with confidence. It means whatever ministry, whatever area he puts us, wherever he calls us to, that he will be with us through it all, so we don't have to worry, because it's not on our own strength. God is with us. So then Moses, he says, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, this is like a drop the mic moment almost from God. He says, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent you. I am Yahweh. God doesn't explain everything about himself. He doesn't give some long, drawn out, fancy thing about his name. He simply says, I am who I am. And I am sent you. In John 9:58, Jesus would say, before Abraham was, I am. Then, understanding what Jesus is implying, they try to kill him. This is a significant moment. The name Yahweh still has significance to modern-day Jews, and it can be translated, I will be, which gives great comfort to us. We know that God is unchanging and is the same God now as he was then. Like verse 12 says, I will be with you. I will be with you. Then God lays out a blueprint of what he's going to do. And we pick up in chapter 4. So I'll read through it real quick, but this is just basically a blueprint of what God will be doing. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what you have done, what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to your voice. Remember this verse 18. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it, and after that he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor, any woman who lives in her house, for silver, gold, and jewelry, and for clothing, and you shall put them on your sons, and on your daughters, and you will plunder the Egyptians. So this is exactly what will happen. God just lays out his exact plan to Moses. He says, this is how it's going to be. This is what's going to happen. And that's where we're going to end up. And then we pick up in chapter 4. And Moses answered, but behold, what if they will not believe me or listen to my voice? For they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. Remember verse 18? They will listen to your voice, is what God tells Moses. But then Moses was like, well, they will not believe me or listen to my voice. What did God just say? What did God literally just finish saying? He said, they will listen to your voice. And Moses is trying to make excuses here. And we will see that continue through this chapter. So the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. Yeah. If that happened to me, if I had a staff in my hand, I threw it on the ground and became a snake, I'm running. I am gone. I ain't coming back. Now I'm gone. I do not like snakes, and no, I'm gone. My staff becomes a snake. That staff is going into the bush and getting burnt. If it doesn't get consumed, then I'm running further. So then we see what God tells him to do, and before anyone says Moses doesn't have faith, look at this. But the Lord said to Moses, "Put out your hand and catch it by the tail." So he put out his hand and caught it, and became a staff in his hand. I ain't going near that snake, and I am not picking it up by the tail. No, that's... Moses is a better man than I am, because a snake is where I draw the line. No, not really, but this is my point, is that Moses has faith here. He goes and picks it up by the tail, and it turns back into a piece of wood. Now, it's me. I am now terrified of my staff. I'm terrified that if I accidentally drop the thing, it'll become a snake and attack me. So I'm already like, alright, God, this is a sign you give me? Come on, man. So then the next sign is the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." He puts his hand inside the cloak, and when he pulls it out, it's leprous like snow. And when he puts it back in and takes it out, it's clean. Another sign. This is a sign of how leprosy was a sign of sin. When Jesus Christ would come and die for us, he would cleanse that leprosy. And of course, leprosy was something that would not go away. That people with leprosy would be banned from the camp. So this would be, of course, an extra kind of crazy sign to them, because leprosy had such importance. Like, no, you're leprous, you can't be near me. But Moses points out God is king over even disease, puts it in his cloak, pulls it out, it's leprous. Puts it back in, it's clean. And then the third one, take water, drip it on the ground, it'll become blood. And that of course will be one of the plagues as well. Moses said, "Oh my Lord, I am not eloquent either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." Of course he managed to get that out just fine, but then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with you, with your mouth, and teach you what you shall say." That's pretty comforting. We can know that even today. If God's with us, He will, through the Holy Spirit, He will be with us and show us and teach us what to say. And then God's also trying to get to the heart of the issue here with Moses, and we'll see Him do just that. He says, "But he said, 'Oh my Lord, please send someone else.'" Moses is like, goes through excuses, realizes that God's not going to cave, so he's like, "Fine, God, would you just send someone else? I don't want to do this. It's not me, God. Choose someone else, please." So God's anger is kindled. He says, "Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart." While this is perfect, seemingly for Moses, we know that there will be some troubles and problems that Aaron being there will cause, such as the golden calf, and such as what will happen with his sons. Nadab and Abihu making special fire, and doing the sacrificial system wrong, and not honoring it, and doing things in their own power. So we'll see that there will be issues caused because of this decision that Moses makes, not wanting to do it and wanting someone with him. But God says, "He shall speak for you to the people, and shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff, with which you shall do the signs." So then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive." And Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." Moses doesn't give Jethro necessarily the whole story. Moses knows what's going on in Egypt, but can you imagine trying to tell someone, "Well, I went to a mountain, there was a bush, it was on fire, but it wasn't really burning up, and then I heard God's voice from the bush." And then, I took my piece of wood, my staff in my hand, I threw it to the ground, it became a snake. I picked it up by the tail and it was wood again. And then I put my hand in my cloak and I pulled it out and it was like white as snow. It was so leprous. And then I put it back in and pulled it out and it was fine. Oh, and then, you know, he told me I could put water on the ground, it would become blood. So, yeah, that's kind of what happens. And now I'm supposed to go to Egypt and save the people, the entire Israelite nation. Yeah, that's kind of what happened, Jethro. I mean, he doesn't really go into that. I mean, can you imagine? Some people would be looking at you like you're a crazy person. Like, what now? A snake? Oh, man. What? Leprous? A burning bush, but it wasn't burning? What? Right? There's definitely... I don't blame him for not telling Jethro here. But... And the Lord said to Moses... and Jethro says to Moses, "Go in peace." And the Lord said to Moses and Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead." So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand. So we see Moses, another 40 years old now. He's in his 80s. He's probably 80-ish. Puts his sons on the back of the donkey with the mom. And I heard my pastor said this, that these men were probably older. They were not teenage boys or even younger. They very likely had them when they were younger or when they were first in Midian. So these men are probably 20s or 30s, and they're on the back of the donkey with their mom, and now they ride off to go to Egypt to answer God's call. While they were hesitant, they were very hesitant. While Moses was very hesitant, we'll see that they end up going, and that God has called them, and that they're taking these steps. And then, can you imagine if God didn't, just gave up on Moses, saying, "Okay, fine, you don't want to do this, I'll find someone else." Once God calls us to something, and we are going towards that call, God doesn't just hand that call to someone else and say, "You take over from here." God says, "I'm going to use you, whether you like it or not, Moses, and you're going to become known as in the Hall of Faith for it, and you're going to be known for forever because of what you've done, and you're following me. And you'll do some amazing things." Moses will see some amazing stuff. Like, can you imagine? He'll be with God, getting the Ten Commandments and in his glory. And then, even crazier, later on when we see the guy who stole some of the stuff that was supposed to go to God and buried it, that the ground will tear open and eat him. You'll see some crazy stuff. So this man Moses, and God's called him, and God continues to make sure he's following him. And we'll flip back to Acts just to wrap up. Stephen is talking about Moses. The Lord said, "Take off your sandals." This is just a summary. "I've surely seen the affliction of my people. And this Moses whom they rejected, God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of an angel who appeared to him in the bush." So we see Moses. This is the second set 40 years, the start of the new chapter of his life. We'll dive into it more next week, and we'll kind of finish off this portion on Moses, and we'll move on. But this is a truly incredible story where we just see the grace of God, that even this man Moses, who was doing things on his own power, and we see it backfire miserably. We see him fleeing Egypt for his life. We now see the same exact man living truly sold out for God, and just we're going to see him do amazing things. And God can use each and every one of us. It's just we have to let him. And we also have to know that it's not us that does it. It says in verse 12, "But I will be with you." God will be with us. We don't have to worry. We can take those steps of faith. We can do what we need to do because it says right there, God will be with you. We can do things at church, like serve in a certain ministry. Whether that doesn't feel like our gifting, God will equip us. We just have to be faithful to him and have faith that he will use us where he wants us, no matter what. And God will not give up on us. He's truly, like he does with Moses, he doesn't let some excuses get in the way. He says, okay, you can make excuses, go ahead. I'm not going to give up on you. You're going to do exactly what I say you're going to do, and you're going to do it to my glory, and I'm going to give you success in it. We see that God humbled this man. We need to be humbled first before God can truly use us, and that's for all of us. It's hard knowing that giving God full control is one of the hardest things, but we know that when we give God full control, that our lives will never be happier, when things will never work out better, when God is the guy in the driver's seat, because truly, our lives are not our own. Our lives are for God and for living for God, and it's just really cool. Moses is such a good picture of, despite his doubts, despite his fears, despite his insecurities, despite how big this task may seem, that because Moses has been equipped by God, that this will work out very well for Moses. In the end, again, no matter what we do, if that is God's will for us, if he calls us to it, we know that he's equipped us for it. So, hope you all enjoyed this, and I will see you next week for the next 40 years of his life.